That was kind of a pivotal moment in my life and my spiritual journey, because it really made me really realize that just because we ask God for something does not mean that we're going to get it. And it just really gave me this perspective that God really does have a perspective that is so much bigger than we can even imagine. And so when we have our little myopic view of our lives, when all we can see is what's going on in our lives, often our circumstances don't make sense and they are painful. And we ask, why is this happening to me? But what we're not thinking about is the bigger picture, which God can see.
This isn't easy. This isn't clear. And you don't need Jesus till you're here. The confusion, the doubts you hide up and walk away. You walk away. When a heart breaks, when a heart breaks, when a heart breaks.
Hi guys, it's Amanda and welcome to my channel Eat, Pray, Crunch. This is part 4 of my series on our infertility journey. And last time I talked about our whole IVF process and talked about, going through all of the drugs that I had to take, and I experienced hyperstimulation syndrome. If you're curious about all of that, you can check out part 3, which I have linked below. I also have part 1 and part 2 linked below. Please watch those as well to see our whole journey. So where I left off last time was that we were going through the dreaded 2-week wait, waiting to see if the IVF took. During our 2-week wait, I was distracting myself, just trying to get through it. It was a time of very intense prayer. We had a lot of our church community and friends and family praying for us. I remember I had a group of people that I was emailing at the time, updating with how everything was going and what specifically we needed prayer for at that time. We were feeling quite hopeful because they had told us, you removed your polyp, so that's not an issue. And since it was a male factor and we bypassed that with the ICSI, with injecting 1 sperm into each egg, which bypasses that whole problem. And they said because I was young and healthy, the odds were pretty darn high that it would work. So we were feeling quite hopeful about it. So I remember the day that I was supposed to go in and get my pregnancy test. When you do an IVF cycle, you can't just take a pee test, like a pee pregnancy test, because of all of the artificial hormones that they're injecting you with. It can alter a urine pregnancy test, so they have you come in to actually have a blood pregnancy test. So I remember going in and having my blood drawn and thinking, this is the moment of truth. And we didn't get the results until the next day. I remember, just to keep my eyes on the prize at the time, I was watching the is it National Geographic or one of these old, it was like in 80s documentary, but The Miracle of Life, and where it shows, microscopically, like actual fertilization and embryos growing and fetuses, and just like actually showing in the womb. And I was just trying to psych myself up, like get into that frame of mind and just staying positive. I was in the middle of watching this when the news came. About an hour before I got the phone call, I started bleeding, and I was thinking, but maybe it's just some spotting. I know that can happen. But then I got the phone call, and I'm glad that it was my favorite doctor there that called to give us the news that it failed. Sorry, I'm gonna get emotional just remembering all this. I remember Bill was there with me at the time, and I remember the feeling that I had It was just a feeling of complete devastation. Felt like we had just hit rock bottom, and it was just this like defeated, empty kind of feeling. And I remember that Bill and I just sat there and cried together on the couch. That's all we could do. We just sat there and cried together on the couch. We were both so disappointed. Here we had spent $20,000 with high hopes that this would probably work, and it didn't. And let me tell you that at that moment in my life, I had a very intense spiritual crisis. I basically had a little spiritual tantrum, you could call it. And I was basically like, God, why us? Why are you allowing this to happen? And thinking, why is it there are so many people in this world who really should not be parents, who get pregnant right away, and here we are suffering and struggling, and this failed. Like, God, we thought you had your hand on this. We thought that you were in control here. And I really started to question whether God existed, honestly. You know, I went through phases, you know, when I was exploring my spirituality as a teenager, when I would think, well, you know, being agnostic, you really don't know for sure whether God does or does not exist. Nobody can know for sure, yada, yada, yada. But it was easy to be heady and philosophical about that. But when you're faced with a very dark place in your life, and when you hit emotional and spiritual rock bottom, that causes you to evaluate the existence of God in a way that you haven't really before. It's a lot more personal. It's a lot more meaningful and in depth. It's not just thinking about, oh, yada yada, does God exist? Let's philosophize about this. No, like, this is a matter of, we have been in very intense relationship with God. We have been praying. We've had a whole community praying for us, and hoping for the best, and we felt like God didn't follow through, is how it felt to us at the time. I really had a very real spiritual crisis. That day, after we finished crying on the couch because there were no more tears left, we basically we decided, you know what, we need to get out of this house. We need to go for a walk. We need to go do something to just not necessarily think about something else, but just process this together outside. We need to move, just do something to get out of this house. So we decided to go to this park that was near the house that we lived at the time. And there's a river there, and a lake kind of further back from the river, and some wetlands. And I remember just walking down there and just contemplating all this stuff, this spiritual crisis that I was having. And I know that Bill was asking a lot of these questions too, and we had prayed together after this as well, even though I was questioning whether God was even there. But looking back on this, going on this walk, this urge that we had to go out and go to this place to go on this walk, was a God thing. I had one of the most intense encounters with God at that park, at that place, than I had in quite some time. There have been a few times in my life where I have felt God's presence that intensely. The first was when I first decided to come to the Christian faith, and the second being another very dark time in my life previously in college. And this was basically the third time, and it's rare that it happens this intensely, but I had a very real, very intense encounter with God. I remember walking by the river, and it was almost sunset, and the clouds were like nothing I had seen. They were just lit up, they were orange, they were thunderheads, they were just all these amazing clouds everywhere surrounding us. The sky was pink. I remember we were walking through the woods and there were these just little, it had rained not too long before that, so there were all these little crystal droplets on everything with the sun shining through them. And I'm gonna get emotional talking about this as well. But I remember we walked back from the river back to where this lake was. And that's when this encounter with God became intense. I was walking by the lake and the words from Psalm 23 just popped into my head and were reeling through my head. The words, "You lead me by still waters," and this is what I saw. I just like stood there in awe looking at this amazing like manifestation of like pure beauty. I can't even describe it. It was a very spiritual experience.
I heard the doctor, but what did he say? I knew I was fine about this time yesterday. Well, I don't need answers. Well, I just need some peace. I just need someone who could help me get some sleep. Yeah, who could help me get some sleep. This isn't easy. This isn't clear. And you don't need Jesus till you're here. The confusion, the doubt you hide, up and walk away. They walk away. When a heart breaks, when a heart breaks.
But in that moment, in me, in all of my doubting and questioning and saying, God, where the heck are you in this? In that moment, I just felt this flood of God over me. I can't even describe it. It was so powerful. And it was just this peace came over me. This peace and acceptance about the situation. I really felt like God was just embracing us and surrounding us and saying, I am still here and I still love you. Don't lose hope was what I kept hearing in my head. Don't lose hope. And I just had this feeling like God was assuring us that we would have a child one day. I just had this strong feeling we would have a child one day. I felt like God was giving us that assurance, and I didn't know when or how or what, but I just had this incredible peace after I had had this like spiritual tantrum. And that was kind of a pivotal moment in my life and my spiritual journey, because it really made me really realize that just because we ask God for something does not mean that we're going to get it. I mean, it's like a small child asking for something. The kids aren't always going to get what they ask for, right? And often there's a good reason for it that they don't understand at the time, but they do later, you know what I mean? And it just really gave me this perspective that God really does have a perspective that is so much bigger than we can even imagine. And so when we have our little myopic view of our lives, when all we can see is what's going on in our lives, often our circumstances don't make sense and they are painful. And we ask, why is this happening to me? But what we're not thinking about is the bigger picture, which God can see. I've philosophized about this before. I don't know, I really don't know how much of our life circumstances God directly has influence on and how much is just stuff happening. you know, and just random chance. And I have to think that it's a little bit of both. I really don't know. I'm not sure if I believe that God plans out every little thing in our lives. I don't think we're marionettes. I do think that there is an element of cause and effect and random chance of just, you know, shit happens sometimes. But I do think that God does intervene sometimes and does change circumstances sometimes and does cause things to happen sometimes. And I don't know if we will ever know which is which for sure with certainty, which is God influencing and which is just random chance things happening. But I do feel that through this process, I really felt like I learned the lesson that we are not in control. As much as we like to think we are in control, a lot of the time we try to micromanage every little thing in our lives. We're not in control, ultimately. I almost think that this is one of those things that was not an accident. That God was making me face my greatest fear in life of the possibility of never having a child of my own. That was, I think, my single greatest phobia in life. And I almost think it's not an accident that we had to go through these circumstances. I think God really used that in me to really make me grow spiritually in a way that I wouldn't have had we not gone through this. And there's something really powerful in that, something when you have to face your fears head on and like face it in a very real way. Like this was a real possibility that we were not going to have kids. Here we had a failed IVF and obviously we weren't getting pregnant naturally. Just in that day even, I just feel like I had this incredible spiritual shift in my life. And really just came back to God and said, I know you're there, Lord, I know you're there. And I know that you are going to get us through this. These circumstances are crappy. I don't know whether you caused them to happen or whether it's just crappy circumstances and you're going to help us through it, one way or the other. After that happened, I remember thinking about some friends that we have. They had had a child who was born with a very severe disability. I remember reading her blog once and just being so amazed by the depth of her wisdom through the process that they had to go through, which is a similar spiritual process I can imagine. And I remember her saying, God, why me? And then she later had the feeling of, why not me? And what makes me so special that I should be exempt from all the pain and suffering in the world? You know, what makes me think that I am going to get through life scot-free, you know? Basically, pain and suffering in this life is inevitable, and it really is true. Like, why should any of us think that we are going to be exempt from that? And I remember just thinking that perspective and saying, oh yeah, like, that's an important perspective. God is not going to hand life to us on a silver platter, you know. We still got to get through difficult stuff in our lives, and that is where the rubber meets the road in our spiritual life, in our spiritual progress, and just our personal growth. That's where growth happens, is in those difficult times. And if we didn't have that, life would be really boring and we would be basically spoiled brats. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but I have just learned through life that those times in our lives that we really go through those dark times, the pain and the suffering, is really when the rubber meets the road. Every time I have gone through a difficult experience, God shows up in a way that I never would have imagined possible, and changed me in a profound way through those experiences for the better. I really feel like pain and suffering will either make us or break us, and I really believe that if you allow God to guide you through those processes, that it will make us, not break us. I really feel that I am a better person today because of this experience that we have gone through. Anyway, so that is the whole spiritual transformation that I went through in our whole infertility process and failed IVF and all of that. So that basically brings us to the end of my little infertility series here. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching. And if there are any of you out there who are going through this right now and going through IVF or infertility or any of that kind of struggle, please leave a comment below and let me know. This issue takes such a special place in my heart. I know what that struggle is like. I know it well. All the pain and the doubt and the fear. I know it well. And my heart goes out to you. So if that is something you're going through, please leave a comment and let me know so I can pray for you. I would love to do that for you. So that's it, you guys. Thank you so much for watching this series. And for those of you who have been subscribed to my channel, you know that the story does not end there. I am about to start another series on what happened after our whole infertility journey and our failed IVF and how we went forward and what happened next. So stay tuned for that next series, and thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Bye.